Read it again, the attorney said, voice flat as a courthouse wall. Damian Cross stared into the camera lens like it was an eye that wouldn't blink first. The room was too bright, the kind of brightness that made lies look pale and sick. His hands, those confident hands that signed skyscraper deals with a flourish, trembled around a single sheet of paper. Somewhere behind the glass, a clock ticked. Not a soft, decorative tick. A precise, surgical tick. Tick, tick, tick. Damian swallowed. The sound caught in his throat like a splinter. "I, Damian Cross," he began, voice cracking on the name. "Acknowledge and admit." Outside the recording room, Elena Cross stood in the hallway with her coat still on, rain beading on the collar. She didn't move. She didn't breathe too loudly. She simply listened, because she had learned that the most important moments in life didn't arrive with music. They arrived with silence. Harold Wren was beside her, hands in his pockets as if this were nothing more than waiting for a table at a diner. His face was calm, the calm of a man who had watched storms form on distant horizons and knew exactly where they would break. Elena glanced at him. "How are you so steady?" Harold didn't look at her. His gaze stayed on the closed door, on the guarded threshold where Damian's voice was being captured forever. He answered softly, almost kindly, "Because time doesn't rush when it knows it's going to win." Tick, tick, tick. Damian's voice rose and fell inside the room, each sentence a stone dropped into his own deep well. And Elena, standing in the hallway, realized something that made her spine go cold. This wasn't a victory party. This was a funeral, not of a man, of a myth. Because to understand why Damian Cross, Grayford City's golden builder, the face of cross-meridian development, was now reading his own downfall into a camera, you have to go back. Not to when Elena first fell in love with him, not to when he bought her gifts and called her his luck, but to the exact moment he stopped seeing her as a person and started seeing her as a parking space he no longer needed. This story doesn't begin here. It begins on a day Elena left the courthouse with a rusted car key in her palm and an empty seat beside her. Grayford City knew how to dress up cruelty. Its courthouses had marble floors polished so hard you could see your own face in your defeat. Its elevators smelled like expensive cologne and old money. Its waiting rooms were filled with people who pretended they weren't waiting to lose something. On the day the divorce finalized, Elena sat on a wooden bench and tried not to shake. Damian didn't sit. He stood. He leaned against the wall like the building belonged to him. He wore a suit the color of deep charcoal, the kind that made him look carved out of certainty. His watch flashed when he moved his wrist. Bright, aggressive, unnecessarily expensive. Elena's eyes kept catching on that watch, not because she missed the man who used to tuck her hair behind her ear, but because she remembered vividly a day in Harold Wren's tiny watch shop when Damian had complained, laughing, that the ticking was annoying. Now his watch didn't tick at all. It glowed, as if time itself had been replaced with status. When the judge finished reading, Elena heard the words like they were happening to someone else. Division of assets. Spousal support. Final decree. Then the gavel landed. A simple sound, really. Wood on wood. But Elena felt it in her ribs. Damian turned toward her in the hallway afterward, surrounded by his attorney and two colleagues who looked pleased, as if her pain were a quarterly report. He smiled. Not a warm smile, a sharp one. "The car's outside," he said, as if he were doing her a favor. Elena blinked. "The car?" He shrugged. "The old one. You always liked it." That was a lie. She'd hated it. It stalled on cold mornings. The passenger door stuck. It smelled faintly of oil and disappointment, but it was the only thing left with her name on it. He tilted his head, watching her take it in. "Look," Damian said, lowering his voice as if he were sharing a secret. "You'll be fine. You're resilient." That's what people like you do. You survive. People like you. Elena's throat tightened. I gave you years. Damien's smile didn't move. And you got to live in a penthouse. Her hands clenched. I built that life with you. No, he said, almost amused. You lived in it, I built it. He stepped closer, just enough to make her feel small without touching her. And if you're hoping your father is going to swoop in and save you? Damien chuckled. Elena, he's a watch repairman. He fixes tiny gears for old men who can't let go of the past. Elena's eyes flashed. Don't talk about him. Damien's gaze drifted past her shoulder, toward the courthouse doors, toward the rain. I'm not talking about him, he said lightly. I'm describing him. Then he walked away. Laughter caught between him and the hallway's cold air, leaving Elena standing there with nothing but the echo. Outside, Grayford's rain fell hard and straight, like it meant business. Elena reached the parking lot and found the car. A faded sedan. A scratch across the back bumper. The kind of vehicle that looked like it had already accepted defeat. She sat behind the wheel and stared at her hands. They were shaking. She hated that they were shaking. She hated that he could do that to her without ever raising his voice. She started the engine. It coughed, then caught. And as she pulled out, the city's glass towers blurred through the rain, and Elena realized she was not just losing a marriage. She was being erased. She drove straight to Wren & Son Watch Repair. It sat on a quieter street where Grayford City pretended not to notice the older buildings. The shop window displayed faded watches on velvet stands. A bell above the door jingled when she entered. The smell hit her first. Metal, oil, wood, time. Harold Wren looked up from his workbench. A small magnifying lens clung to his eye like a second pupil. He set it down slowly when he saw her face. He didn't ask questions right away. He just reached for a kettle. Tea first, then truth. Elena sat at the little table by the back wall, the one with the chipped paint. I'm sorry, she whispered, and she didn't even know what she meant by it. Sorry she failed. Sorry she believed. Sorry she wasn't stronger. Harold set a cup down in front of her, hands steady. Tell me what happened, he said. Elena's mouth opened, and everything came out. The affair she'd suspected and then confirmed. The quiet withdrawals. The way Damien had insisted she didn't need to worry her pretty head about finances. The divorce that felt less like a separation and more like an extraction. And he said... Elena's voice broke. He said you were nobody. Harold's eyes didn't flare. He didn't do the dramatic thing people expected from fathers. He simply looked at the watch on his bench, an old pocket watch with a cracked face, and pressed his thumb lightly against it. Tick, tick, tick. Elena noticed the sound more than she'd ever noticed it before. Harold said, Damien Cross always did confuse quiet with weak. Elena laughed bitterly. He hid everything. There's no proof. He's got money in places I can't even name. Accounts, currencies, digital wallets, 12 million, maybe more. Harold sipped his tea. Then he stood and walked toward the back of the shop. He opened a drawer Elena had never seen him open. Inside was not jewelry, not a gun, not dramatic proof. It was paperwork. Folders, stamps, a sealed envelope marked with a simple insignia. Ether Guard Trust. Elena stared. Dad, what is that? Harold looked at her the way a man looks at someone standing at the edge of a cliff, careful, but not fearful. It's a lock, he said. Elena frowned. A lock? Harold's voice lowered. And Damien is about to bring me the key. That night, Elena didn't go home. Not because she didn't have a place, because home had become a word she didn't trust. She stayed in the small room above the watch shop, listening to the rain tap the window and the steady ticking below. She lay awake and replayed the courthouse scene until her chest felt raw. Damien's smile, his watch, his words. People like you. In the darkness, Elena whispered to herself, I won't let him write the ending. At dawn, she went downstairs. Harold was already working, as if sleep were optional when you knew what needed to be done. The shop's light was soft and yellow, making everything look gentler than it was. Elena watched him for a long moment. Then she said quietly, Tell me who you really are. Harold didn't stop working. He adjusted a tiny screw with a tool so fine it looked like it belonged to a surgeon. I'm exactly who you think I am, he said. A watch repairman. Elena didn't blink. That's not all. Tick, tick. Harold set the tool down and finally met her eyes. There's a reason I chose this life, he said. Because it's honest. Because time can't be bribed. Because no matter how loud the world gets, a watch still tells the truth. Elena swallowed. And before? Harold's face held a shadow that didn't belong in a warm little shop. Before, he said, I was the man people called when money went missing and nobody could admit it. Elena's breath caught. An auditor? Harold nodded once. Fraud investigation, financial inspection, the kind of work that makes powerful people wake up sweating. Elena's mind raced. Why didn't you ever tell me? Harold's gaze softened. Because I wanted you to have a life that didn't taste like suspicion. Elena's voice trembled. And now? Harold reached under the bench and pulled out a thin file. Inside was a map. Not a city map. A land parcel overlay. A tight choke point highlighted in red. The Narrows parcel. Elena stared. That's Crown Line Yards. Harold nodded. It's the throat of the project, the one piece of land that turns a dream into a construction site. Elena felt a chill. Damien had talked about Crown Line Yards constantly. A redevelopment project so big it would reshape Grayford's skyline. He'd bragged about it at dinners, telling friends he was about to own the future. Harold tapped the document. Etherguard Trust holds it, he said. Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. You own the land Damien needs. Harold's expression was calm, but his words were steel. I don't want his money, Elena. Elena's eyes glistened. Then what do you want? Harold looked back at his watch. Tick, tick. Then he said, I want him to learn what it feels like when the world he built refuses to open for him. Elena's hands shook again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from something sharper. Hope. Harold slid a second folder across the table. Inside were notes, structured, clean, intentional. A plan. 3 steps. Lure. Trace. Isolate. Harold said, Damien thinks he's invisible because he hides money in shadows. Elena nodded slowly. He is. Harold's gaze locked on hers. Then we don't chase him in the dark. Elena leaned forward. We drag him into the light. 2 days later, Damien Cross received an email from a law firm he respected. Not feared, respected. The subject line was short and sweet. Crown Line Yards. Final access requirements. He opened it in his office, surrounded by glass walls and a skyline that felt like a trophy. The letter was polite, clinical. It explained that Etherguard Trust, holder of the Narrows parcel, was willing to negotiate. But only if Damien could demonstrate good faith and integrity. The condition was simple. A personal escrow deposit of $5 million in liquid funds. Damien laughed out loud. His assistant, nervous, pretended not to hear. Damien leaned back in his chair and smirked. $5 million? They think I'm a charity case? But his eyes kept reading. because he understood leverage when he saw it. Without the Narrows parcel, Crown Line Yards was a beautiful presentation and nothing more. He could almost hear investors whispering, "Where's the land? Where's the control? Where's the certainty?" Damien could not afford to be the man who bragged about owning the future and then couldn't close. He called his CFO. He called his private banker. He called people who usually answered in one ring. But the problem wasn't whether Damien had 5 million. The problem was where his money was. It wasn't in a neat bank account. It wasn't in something that would pass a compliance check. It was scattered, fragmented, hidden across places built for silence. 12 million in currency trades. Digital wallets layered like nesting dolls. Money that had never been introduced properly to the legal world. Money that only existed comfortably in the dark. Damien's jaw tightened. He stared at the letter again and whispered almost to himself, "Fine." Then he smiled. Because Damien Cross didn't think in terms of right and wrong. He thought in terms of win and lose. And he assumed he always won. For a full week, Damien didn't sleep well. His nights were filled with spreadsheets that refused to balance and phone calls made in low voices. He instructed a fixer to move funds. He borrowed from one stream to cover another. He made transfers that looked normal only if you didn't know what normal looked like. And slowly, painfully, he began pulling money out of the shadows. Not all at once, because that would look suspicious. He did it carefully, in slices. But even careful movements leave ripples. Banks don't care about your intention. They care about patterns. And when a man who usually moved money like a magician suddenly started funneling millions into legitimate channels, systems noticed. Compliance software didn't feel emotions. It didn't get intimidated by his name. It didn't admire his skyline. It saw numbers. It saw inconsistencies. It saw the scent of laundering like a dog smells fear. Damien didn't know that yet. He was still in the phase of belief, the belief that he was above the rules because he had money. When the escrow confirmation arrived, he felt a surge of satisfaction. 5 million, sitting cleanly in a legitimate account, waiting to be admired like a sacrifice. He walked into the mirror-lined restroom in his office and straightened his tie. Then he smiled at himself. "You see?" he whispered. "You're fine." But in another building, a compliance officer at Cross Meridian Development stared at an alert that had turned the screen red, and she didn't smile. Vivian Locke lived in sleek spaces. Her apartment smelled like expensive candles and ambition. Her wardrobe was a collection of choices designed to make men forget their own names. She wasn't a villain in the way people wanted villains to be. She was simply the kind of person who believed the world rewarded the bold. And in Grayford City, it often did. Elena didn't approach Vivian like a jealous ex-wife. That would have been too predictable. She approached like a woman with information. They met in a quiet cafe where the espresso was bitter and the seats were arranged so everyone could be seen. Vivian arrived in a coat that cost more than Elena's old car. She sat down and looked Elena up and down. "I'm surprised you wanted to meet," Vivian said, voice smooth. "I assumed you'd hate me." Elena held her gaze calmly. "Hate is loud. I'm tired." Vivian smirked. "Then what is this? Closure?" Elena stirred her coffee slowly, buying time the way Harold had taught her. Tick, tick. "Do you trust Damien?" Elena asked. Vivian's smile widened. "He trusts me." Elena nodded as if considering something. Then she said softly, "He's asking you to risk your career for him." Vivian's eyes flickered. "What are you talking about?" Elena leaned in, lowering her voice. Not conspiratorial, just honest. "He's moving money," Elena said, "to look clean for a land deal. And if anything goes wrong, he'll need someone to blame. Someone close enough to touch the paperwork." Vivian's throat moved as she swallowed. Elena continued gently, as if speaking to a friend. "Damien is charming," she said, "but he doesn't love people. He uses them." Vivian's jaw tightened. "You're bitter." Elena didn't react. I'm informed, she corrected. Vivian stared at her, scanning for manipulation. Elena let the silence do its work. Then she slid a single printed page across the table. It wasn't a full dossier. It wasn't an accusation. It was a small, deadly detail. A list of dates and amounts, transfers into accounts tied to Damien. Just enough to create a question, just enough to plant doubt. Vivian stared at it. Her fingers hovered, then pulled it closer. Elena said quietly, "If compliance sees this first, you'll look complicit. If you go to them first, you look careful." Vivian's eyes snapped up. "Why would you help me?" Elena's voice was calm. "Because I don't want revenge that looks like jealousy. I want justice that looks like inevitability." Vivian leaned back, face hardening. She was not a saint. She was a survivor, and survivors didn't go down for someone else's sins. Elena watched the decision settle into Vivian like a stone. Vivian picked up her phone, not to call Damien, to protect herself. And in that moment, Damien Cross lost something he didn't even know he'd had: an ally. Because Elena and Harold weren't just setting a trap, they were cutting off exits. The meeting about Crown Line Yards happened in a conference room that looked like an aquarium. Glass everywhere, no privacy, just reflections of people trying to look confident. Damien walked in with a smile so bright it almost hid the exhaustion behind his eyes. Across the table sat Harold Wren's attorney, a woman whose calm made Damien uncomfortable. A representative from EtherGuard Trust, joined by video, face hidden, voice modulated. Not theatrical, just careful. Damien leaned forward, hands clasped. "The escrow is funded, $5 million, as requested." The attorney nodded. "Excellent." Damien smiled wider. "So we can proceed?" A pause. Then, "Before we proceed, there are additional disclosures we must address." Damien's smile froze. "What disclosures?" he asked, voice still smooth but thinner now. The attorney slid a folder across the table. Damien opened it. Inside were printed compliance alerts, bank inquiries, internal memos, and at the top, a single word: investigation. Damien's pulse spiked. "What is this?" he demanded. The attorney's voice stayed even. "It appears Cross Meridian Development has initiated a compliance review after receiving a report about suspicious transfers tied to your personal and corporate networks." Damien's gaze snapped toward the glass wall, as if he expected to see Vivian standing there. But Vivian was nowhere, because Vivian had already chosen herself. Damien's voice sharpened. "This is nonsense. Someone is trying to sabotage me." The attorney folded her hands. "Sabotage requires falsification. This is documentation." Damien's eyes moved again, scanning, seeing his own numbers, his own patterns, his own fingerprints. His mouth went dry. On the video screen, the modulated voice spoke. "EtherGuard Trust has a strict integrity policy. We cannot proceed with the transaction if the buyer is under investigation for money laundering or fraud." Damien slammed the folder shut. "You can't do this!" The attorney's gaze didn't flinch. "We can." Damien stood abruptly, chair scraping. "Who the hell is behind EtherGuard? Who thinks they can control my project?" The attorney's expression didn't change, but her next words landed like a hammer. "EtherGuard Trust is controlled by Harold Wren." Damien blinked, as if he hadn't heard correctly. "Harold Wren?" he repeated, tasting the name like it was wrong. "The watch repairman?" Damien scoffed, but the scoff was desperate, brittle. The attorney met his eyes. "Yes," she said. "That Harold Wren." Damien's laugh came out too loud. Then it stopped, because the attorney slid one more document forward. A profile summary. Harold Wren's former title, his history, his achievements in fraud detection, names of corporations he had once audited into collapse. Damien's hands tightened around the paper. His mind tried to reject it, because it meant something terrifying. He hadn't been outplayed by a rival billionaire. He hadn't been crushed by a political machine. He had been undone by the man he mocked, a man who knew exactly how to find dirt without digging. Damien's voice dropped. Why? The attorney's answer was simple. Because you left his daughter with nothing but a broken heart and a car you considered trash. Damien's face flushed. This is personal. The attorney nodded slightly. Yes, and then she added, colder now. And it's lawful. Damien's phone buzzed. He looked down. A message from Cross Meridian's compliance department. Please report to legal immediately. Damien's throat tightened. He stared at the screen like it was a death sentence. Because in Grayford City, legal notices didn't arrive unless something was already moving. Damien shoved the documents into the folder and stormed out. But even as he walked, his confidence was leaking. Thin streams of panic he couldn't plug. He didn't know it yet, but Harold's plan had already passed the point of no return. Because the moment Damien pulled that $5 million into legitimate channels, he created the evidence that could now be subpoenaed, traced, and presented. He had dragged his own secrets into the light, and in the light, they couldn't pretend they were harmless. The arrest didn't happen with sirens and dramatic chases. It happened with paperwork, with quiet men in suits, with a knock on a glass door. Damien was in his office when they arrived. He was mid-sentence, barking at a subordinate, trying to reassert power like volume could fix reality. A woman stepped inside, federal investigator, badge clipped, eyes steady. Damien Cross? She asked. He straightened. Yes. Who are you? I'm Special Agent Marin Holt, she said. We have a warrant. Damien's mouth went dry. For what? He demanded, though his body already knew. Money laundering, Holt said. Wire fraud. Conspiracy. Damien laughed once, sharp and fake. This is ridiculous. Agent Holt's gaze didn't move. Sir, please, step away from your desk. His assistant's face turned white. The room felt suddenly too small for his ego. Damien glanced toward the window, toward the skyline he'd always believed was his. Then he saw something that made him feel sick. His reflection. Not powerful, not untouchable. Just a man trapped behind glass. They escorted him out. Employees watched, pretending not to. Phones were lifted discreetly. In Grayford City, downfall was entertainment. The first negotiation happened in a sterile room that smelled like bleach and inevitability. Damien's attorney, new now, hungrier now, leaned in close. They have you, the attorney whispered. The transfers, the timing, the layering. The compliance report is detailed. Damien's voice shook with anger. Who reported me? The attorney hesitated. Vivian Locke. Damien's eyes widened, then narrowed. That betrayal burned hotter than the investigation. Because Damien could stomach the idea of enemies, he could not stomach the idea of being abandoned by someone he considered an accessory. His attorney continued, There may be a way to mitigate sentencing if you cooperate. Damien's laugh was bitter. Cooperate how? The attorney slid a document across the table. Damien read it. His stomach dropped. A recorded confession. Full disclosure. On video. It wasn't just a plea. It was a public execution of his own reputation. Damien's voice lowered. Why would I do this? The attorney's answer was quiet. Because the escrow money, your $5 million, may be returned if you fully comply. Damien stared. That $5 million had become a symbol in his mind, proof he could still muscle his way through. He licked his lips. Fine. The attorney sighed. There's more. Damien's eyes narrowed. What? The attorney's voice turned careful. A civil settlement has been filed on behalf of Elena Cross. Damien's face twisted. What settlement? The attorney swallowed. It requests that any returned escrow funds be redirected as divorce compensation due to concealed assets. Damien's jaw clenched so hard it ached. He whispered, "That's impossible." The attorney didn't argue, because it wasn't impossible. It was legal. It was clean. It was designed. Damien's breathing became shallow. He realized too late what Harold Wren had done. The 5 million wasn't just bait. It was a funnel, a channel, a predictable path. Harold had forced Damien's hidden money to surface, then positioned Elena directly beneath the waterfall. Damien slammed his fist on the table. "I won't—" Agent Holt's voice cut in, calm as a guillotine. "You will if you want a deal." Damien stared at the camera setup in the corner of the room. Its lens looked like a pupil, like judgment. Tick, tick, tick. Damien's expensive watch sat confiscated in an evidence bag somewhere. Time, for the first time, belonged to someone else. Back in the hallway where Elena stood, the door opened. Damien stepped out after the recording, pale and furious. His eyes landed on Elena like a weapon. "You did this," he hissed. Elena met his gaze without flinching. "No," she said softly. "You did this. I just stopped cleaning up your footprints." Damien's face twisted. "You think you've won? You think your little watchmaker father—" Harold stepped forward, the motion small but final. His voice was quiet. "Damien," Harold said, "do you know why watches are beautiful?" Damien blinked, thrown off. Harold continued, "Because they don't care who you are. They don't care how loud you are. They don't speed up because you're important." Harold's eyes held Damien's with a calm that felt like a locked door. "They just keep going," he said, "and eventually they reach the moment you deserve." Damien's lips parted, searching for an insult sharp enough to save him. But there were no insults left that mattered, because security guards were already moving in. Damien was escorted away, and Elena watched him go. Not with joy, not with cruelty, just with a strange, steady emptiness that felt like peace. The sentencing happened months later. News cameras lined the courthouse steps, hungry for a dramatic face. Damien arrived looking thinner, hair less perfect, suit less arrogant. When the judge spoke, the words were heavy, clinical, unstoppable. 8 years. Damien's shoulders sagged. 8 years. Time that would not be bribed. Time that would not be negotiated. Elena sat in the courtroom, hands folded in her lap. Harold sat beside her, posture relaxed. The judge continued. Assets subject to forfeiture. Restitution. Elena's lawyer leaned in and whispered, "The escrow funds have been awarded as compensation." Elena's heart stuttered. 5 million. Not as a lottery win, not as revenge money, as a correction, a rebalancing, a reminder that theft had consequences. Elena didn't cry. She simply closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of being able to breathe again. Afterward, outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions. "Elena, how does it feel? Elena, do you think Damien deserved it?" Elena didn't answer. She walked with Harold through the rain, toward the quiet street where the watch shop waited. And somewhere in the city, the skyline Damien once believed he owned stood unmoved. Grayford City didn't mourn. It simply moved on. The biggest shock didn't come from Damien's sentencing. It came from Harold's next move. A press conference was held at the edge of Crown Line Yards, still mostly gravel and fencing. A dream paused mid-breath. Officials stood beneath umbrellas. Cameras clicked. Harold Wren stepped up to the microphone. He looked out of place in a modest coat, hands weathered, face lined with quiet decades. But he spoke like a man who didn't need to impress anyone. "The Narrows parcel," Harold said, "has been a point of leverage, a pressure point for greed." He paused, letting the wind tug at his words. "I'm donating it," he said, "to the city of Grayford." A stunned murmur rippled through the crowd. Harold continued, voice steady. "It will become a public park, A place that doesn't belong to a corporation. A place that doesn't require an invitation. Reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Wren, why give away land worth billions?" Harold's eyes softened. Not sentimental, just clear. "Because money is a tool," he said, "not a god." The city officials smiled, trying to look noble by proximity. But Elena saw what they didn't. Harold wasn't buying good press. He was making a statement. That the only real victory was one that didn't turn you into the thing you hated. Weeks later, Wren and Sunwatch Repair changed, but not in the way gentrification changes things. The sign stayed. The bell above the door stayed. The smell of oil and metal stayed. But behind the small table in the back room, there was now a second desk, a legal desk, a stack of pamphlets, a list of contacts for women's support services. Elena sat there some afternoons, not wearing a suit, not pretending to be someone else, just listening. Because she had learned that betrayal wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was quiet, slow, routine. A husband controlling bank accounts, a partner hiding assets, a woman slowly realizing her name had been erased from her own life. Women came in with trembling hands and apologetic voices as if they had to justify being hurt. Elena never asked them to justify anything. She'd simply offer tea. Then she'd say, "Tell me what happened." And the ticking of watches around them would fill the pauses, steady and impartial. Tick, tick. Time didn't judge them. It just witnessed. Harold, in the front of the shop, continued repairing watches. He didn't stop being a watchmaker. He simply proved that watchmaking had never been small work. It was patient work, precise work. The kind of work that taught you a truth most powerful men forgot. Tiny gears could stop a giant machine. Sometimes late at night, Elena would walk to the edge of what would soon become the park. Construction crews had begun. Signs promised green space, benches, trees. Elena would stand there with her coat pulled tight and imagine families sitting in sunlight where greed had once planned to build towers. She would imagine laughter in a place once designed for control. And she would think of Damien, not with satisfaction, but with clarity. Because the real punishment wasn't prison. It was the knowledge that he had been defeated by the very thing he dismissed. Not violence, not chaos, but patience. In a correctional facility far from the skyline, Damien sat on a hard cot and listened to a different kind of ticking. Not from a watch. From fluorescent lights. From metal doors. From the schedule that controlled his life now. Time didn't glow here. It didn't flatter him. It didn't care. One day another inmate asked him, "You really built those towers in Grayford?" Damien stared at the wall for a long time before answering. Finally he muttered, "I thought I owned time." The inmate scoffed. "Nobody owns time." Damien's jaw tightened. In his mind he saw Harold Wren's calm eyes. He heard that quiet voice. "Eventually they reach the moment you deserve." Damien closed his eyes, and for the first time in his life he had nowhere to run from the truth. Elena's life didn't become perfect. Healing never did. Some days she still felt the old ache, like a bruise pressed by memory. But it wasn't the same ache. It wasn't helpless. It was honest. And honesty, she learned, was stronger than revenge. One afternoon, a young woman entered the shop, eyes red, hands fidgeting with a ring. "My husband says I'm crazy," the woman whispered. "He says I'm imagining things." Elena didn't laugh. She didn't flinch. She simply slid a cup of tea across the table. "You're not crazy," Elena said gently. "You're noticing." The woman's eyes filled with tears. Elena leaned in, voice quiet but steady, "And we're going to make sure the truth can be seen." Behind them, Harold adjusted a watch on his bench. Its second hand began to move again. Tick, tick, tick. Time, indifferent and fair, continued forward. And in that small shop, where the city's rich never looked twice, justice had found a home that didn't need marble floors. It only needed patience. It only needed precision. It only needed someone willing to stay long enough to hear the ticking and understand what it meant. If this story left a mark on you, if you've ever felt erased, dismissed, or made to doubt your own reality, leave a word in the comments. Not for the algorithm. For someone else who's still sitting in the rain, holding a key to a car they never wanted, wondering if they're alone. You're not. You're